All right, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Tonight we have Dr. Schwaitzberg. Did I pronounce that correctly? Perfect. All right. So he's going to be talking about his time in Desert Storm and what that has done to lead him to what his career is today. So I'm very honored and excited to have Dr. Schwaitzberg talk to us for a little bit, and I will let him take the floor. You guys aren't here to see me.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation, Steve. It means a lot. Yeah, my name is Steve Schwaitzberg, and my current day job is to be the chairman of the Department of Surgery for the University at Buffalo, and the director of surgical programs for both ECMC and Kaleida Health. And it's been in Buffalo about 9 years now. Came from Boston. It's a great place to live, and I'm honored to be here. So one day I woke up and I found myself staring at this sign in the middle of the desert, and I remember pondering, how did I get here? What is the journey that people take to find themselves on the other side of the world on reasonably short notice in the middle of their career as a civilian surgeon in Boston? Well, the story starts actually many, many years earlier, to when I was about 8 years old, and I wanted to be a pilot. Anybody remember Sky King? Oh yeah, I'm with you. And I wanted to be a pilot. And when I was a kid, I joined Civil Air Patrol, which is the civilian auxiliary of the United States Air Force. And indeed, I did learn to fly. And I was a cadet commander and learned about discipline and military and rank and respect and leadership and honesty as a teenager. And I did learn to fly, but my dream of being an astronaut was curtailed by the fact that I didn't have the vision for it. So I went on to college and thought about all those leadership skills. And they're really important. Whether you're running a military unit or a hospital unit or a club or a neighborhood or condo association or courtroom, it doesn't really matter. Leadership translates everywhere you go. And found myself, went to Johns Hopkins, went to Baylor Medical School, and took on the task of becoming a surgeon resident. And there it's all about teams. The same way everything we do in the military is organized around teams. I went and trained at Baylor with somebody that you've been around for a while, Michael DeBakey, a pretty famous heart surgeon who did cool lead those folks. And got to Boston, and somebody came to me and said, would you be interested in joining the United States Army Reserve? And I was about 30. I was single, actually I was divorced. And fortunately I've been married 30 years now, in case my wife is watching. Just had our 30th wedding. And I thought about it for a bit. And I said, I live in the greatest country in the world, and I have a skill that would be useful if young Americans were interested. It doesn't have to be an ideologic decision, whether you're hawk or dove. I have to have a skill set that would be useful no matter what you think, person. And signed up for what was the first of 13 years in the reserves. So I went to basic training, went to Fort Sam Houston. I can tell you that basic training for doctors, it's not like whatever, anybody here in the military, who was in the military? My basic training was not like your basic training. Let me promise you that, and no apologies. Think more like MASH. But we did go out in the field, and I subsequently did go to combat casualty care course and chemical warfare school and some of those other activities. And in Thanksgiving, right after the shooting started, about 2 days before Thanksgiving, I was minding my own business, not really thinking much about going overseas, sort of wondering. About 2 weeks earlier, I had gotten a big packet in the mail for my promotion from captain to major, and I'm thinking, why does anybody care about a reserve captain doctor at this time? I got my answer 2 weeks later, when on Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I got a message in my office saying, please call Sergeant Marcia Brewer from the 365th Evac in Niagara Falls, New York, while I was in Boston. And so I called and miraculously got through. And she started reading me a long paragraph. I only remember like the first 5 words for the first time through. And it was, by order of the President, you are hereby involuntarily transferred from the 4th General Hospital in Boston to the 365th Evac in Niagara Falls. She went on for a while. I don't know, Marcia, if you're going to watch live on YouTube, I'll never forget that day. And I had to actually have it repeated. And before it sank in, I was leaving for a war zone. But I knew, having been around the military just enough, it's like I'm not going anywhere without orders. She fixed that problem. It's known as a fax machine. And my name was buried on like page 32 for 14,000 medical personnel were activated that day. And my name was buried in the middle of the list. Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I had no rank, I had no insignia, I had no nothing that was consistent with my promotion. And I called up my then fiance, now wife, who was interviewing for her own residency in Washington, D.C. And I said, I have to talk to her. And they go, well, she's in interviewing with the chairman of the Department of OBGYN. She's a gynecologist here in town, an associate dean at the medical school. I said, well, you're going to have to interrupt that. So you can imagine that you're interrupting your spouse in like the most important job of their life. So she comes running out like I'm dead, and I go, no, I've been activated and I have to report on Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, so 3 days. So she came back, we got uniforms, I had a Thanksgiving, and people were so nice. I grew up as a kid in the post-Vietnam era. We didn't really treat our vets very well. We didn't treat them very well when they were in combat, in theater, and we didn't treat them great when they came home either. And that's one of the lessons that I learned, particularly when I came back, the differences between how badly we did when I was a teenager and today. I remember being in Boston. She hadn't gotten home. I said, well, I've got one more meal at home before Thanksgiving. What do you want to do? So I walked into Legal Seafood in Boston. I looked like somebody had run over my dog or something. And they said, well, I'm going overseas. And they just brought out the nicest dinner and said, thank you, and took no charge. So I got activated. I went to Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland. It's a chemical warfare facility. We took the chemical warfare course, and the only take-home message from that is with a great group of people. One of the things about being in the military, and I hope you had a similar experience, is these are some of the greatest people in the world. Particularly if you're a reserve unit, you volunteer for it, you signed up for it. Great people, really great people. And we're in the air, and we're flying charter out of Andrews Air Force Base, and the commander of the hospital came back with all of his senior officers. Now I was a senior officer, I was a major. So that bad news, or maybe good news. They lost our hospital. They can't find our hospital. Because it wasn't set up anywhere. It was like in a box. It's like, hospital in a box. And we're in the air. We're over the ocean. And there was a whole lot of talk about what we were going to do with 400 soldiers forming the 365th Evac Hospital, meeting lots of great people from Niagara Falls, New York. We didn't know anybody from Niagara Falls at the time, even though my grandparents lived in Rochester. And eventually it was decided that we would land in the which is a pretty nice place, on an Air Force base in the form of a joint Air Force Army facility on the flight line in Sea Oman. So the next morning, I took this the first morning that I woke up, Camp Nasarima. Anybody know what it means?
Yeah. Academy.
It's American spelled backwards.
What?
It's American spelled backwards. You couldn't fly, you couldn't throw too much of America, even to the base of the Omanis, who were pretty reasonable folks. You could actually drink beer in Oman in the 1990s. That was amazing. And it was a combined Army Air Force facility with the hospital from Scott Air Force Base. And we formed this unit. I've run into people, I don't know if anybody have ever run into Kurt von Fricken, one of our thoracic surgeons, been deployed 10 times. They said, well, you were the way back evac. But the truth of the matter is that the military logistics in the Middle East were very different than Vietnam. In Vietnam, everything's a helicopter right away. In the kinds of distances we were talking, you needed strategic transportation, not just tactical transportation. So we weren't as far away as people realized. We had all the same problems of anybody else stationed anywhere in the military in the Middle East at a time when you thought you were going to be in harm's way. Anybody know what this is? Other than a bird? No, it's your biological warfare detector. So every big tent, and this was our mobile medical aerostaging facility, and the word was, if you wake up in the morning and your bird is dead, you will soon join them. So one morning we had lots of tents, lots of birds, although the Air Force had the best stuff. Without a doubt, the Air Force had the best. They had flush toilets, they had air conditioning. Army, no such thing. Plywood with the whole cut of it, no air conditioning. So one day, as it so happened, the poor bird died. I mean, birds die. And I remember looking at it going, oh my God, trying to imagine whether I was going to be dead in a few minutes. And I looked at all the other birds. But it's a lot to take in when that's this level of sophistication that you might have to appreciate. We had the same problems. We had to be prepared for chemical warfare. We were ready for drills to be in full protection within a few minutes. And because our hospital was on a flight line, we were sitting on millions of gallons of jet fuel. The United States is not actually a signatory to the Geneva Convention, although we all had Geneva Convention cards. So we were prepared, and we were prepared to take casualties offloading off of large airplanes, 50, 60 at a time. So we were ready. There's a younger, better shaped, better looking version of the person standing in front of you today, and we had to dig our own sandbags because of the terrible winds, and I'll show a picture at the end. We needed to prepare for the schmal, which is the big sandstorms in the Middle East. With me is Hector Henry, who was a urologist, and Hector and I were filling sandbags and digging ditches so that if it did rain, it's a real problem in the desert, that we would be flooded. Well, we did real surgery there. There I am taking out a gallbladder with one of the junior officers. And there's no laparoscopic surgery, no robots, no nothing. It was just good old fashioned knife, clamp, cut, so tie. And there we are taking a gallbladder out of actually a Navy captain who had come all the way off the boat to find a reserve surgeon figuring that they had been like real surgeons in civilian practice, to take out his gallbladder. And the very next day after open surgery, he walked out of the hospital and went back to the boat. So some people are just tough. I have all the respect in the world. While we were there and it looked like things were going well for our side, it became clear that the Allied forces were amassing tremendous numbers of prisoners of war. And while we were sitting there in Oman, and there was not very much shooting, they had a need to move medical units really rapidly to the two big prisoner of war camps, Brooklyn and Bronx, because they had not placed sufficient medical facilities. When I got there with my team, there were literally 4 doctors, one psychiatrist, one physiatrist, that's a rehab doctor, and 2 people who hadn't done any clinical medicine in, I don't know, 5 or 10 years. And they'd had multiple deaths in the camp the night before from starvation, from unattended injuries from the previous Iran-Iraq conflict, and they had 20,000 prisoners. So we set up a team, and you really weren't allowed to take pictures, so I bought a Kodak Instamatic camera from the base PX and stuck it in my sleeve, and I had pictures of sky and pictures of dirt. But if you want to know what happened to all those leisure suits in the 1970s, I can tell you exactly where they went. They went here. And it was an extraordinary experience meeting these people. And they talked about their experiences in the Iran-Iraq war. They talked about diseases that you never see in the United States, like leishmaniasis, which they call Baghdad boil. And one of the things that we needed to find was we needed to find the physicians that were behind the wire. And the physicians behind the wire from the Iraqis, they didn't want to come forward because they felt they would be stuck there the longest. But eventually we got them forward and got them talking to us. And you find that most people weren't people. They didn't want to be there either. Some of them were reservists. I met the head of the Department of Anatomy from Baghdad University. He'd been activated about 3 days earlier than I did. He didn't even have any boots when he got captured. He was captured, doing cleaning himself up. And we had more in common than we had different. And he taught me a lot of diseases in the Middle East. And before I left, I gave him my boots, my extra sets of boots. Actually, I didn't want to have to carry them back, but I really learned that we thought they were our sworn in, but the people really weren't our sworn in. Their leaders were our sworn in. And most of them were just like you were. But most of all, what I made was great friends. And this is at a sandstorm. I'm not holding on to him because Wayne and I were in love or anything, but the wind was really blowing. Remember what it was doing yesterday? We had gone to Shays, and the wind was blowing in the theater when they opened the doors. It was really blowing, and you couldn't really see much past that tent. I made friends that I still have for life. And it was an incredible experience. Any war that you can come back from in one piece is an interesting experience. And not everybody gets to come back in one piece. There weren't that many casualties. There were 4 physician deaths, one of which caused by great stupidity when somebody tried to bring a landmine home. Not a recommended activity. And Wayne and I became great friends because it turns out he was in Worcester when I was in Boston, and we became friends for the rest of his life. So that's one of the important things. So my take-home messages, and then I can talk about a few things about how this is translated to today. Is we live in a great country. There's no doubt we live in a great country. We're not perfect. If anybody reads the newspaper, we all know we are not perfect, but it still beats the alternatives. And as a matter of consequence, we should all serve in some way. It doesn't have to be the military, but we should all serve. So what did that mean later? How did that impact me when I got home and thought about the rest of the world? I thought about those lessons in leadership. I thought about what it meant to respect every single person in our unit. The military is great. You get ribbons and awards, and we organize mass casualty. But one of the things it really put me in touch with was the regular people from this community who were serving as medics and corpsmen and stretcher bearers and nurses. And they're just regular people wanting to serve their country and a cause together. And you never know where you're going to run into these people again. So one of them is still an orderly in our hospital at Buffalo General, Desert Storm veteran. And one of them, I was driving down Main Street near Main and Transit, The license plate said 365th. I go, that can't be a coincidence. So I drive out, I start honking like I'm some sort of, crazy person. Roll your window down. I said, were you in the 365th evac? And he goes, yeah. I said, did you go to Desert Storm? He goes, yeah, me too. And it was like, instant friends. That unit has been since disbanded. It's sort of remnant of it is like the 865th somewhere in upstate New York. But the leadership lessons persist. The military expects its leaders to be the best examples of all of us. Whether you're a non-com or an officer, it really doesn't matter. You're a leader. Leaders eat last. Leaders take care of their troops first. Leaders respect everybody. Leaders care about everybody. And if you wonder how you get a job like this, that's what I learned from being here. So with that, I will open it up to questions or comments. Sure.
How long did you serve and how long were you active duty?
So I served in the reserves for 13 months. Probably spent an aggregate, because I went to Honduras, I went to other places, probably an aggregate of maybe a year and a half. But most of it, if you think about it, the military only needs this huge volume of medical people when it's in combat. And much of what I did in the peacetime military was supporting, Corps of Engineer operations in Honduras. The Army Corps of Engineers built this gigantic road from Tegucigalpa to San Pedro Sula, in the ocean to build roads and work with the Honduras government. We provided medical support. You don't need all the doctors when it's peacetime. You need them during combat. And to be readily available and trained and be combat qualified is really one of the military's greatest resources. So only 35 or 40% of the entire military's medical resources are on active duty. About a year on active duty.
What do you think about the armed forces not fulfilling their projection as far as enlistments and bringing back the draft
Well,
to off our...
there's a lot of ways you can deal with it. I think we spend a lot of money in our government. I think there's a lot of people who would be well served, for instance, not going right to college, growing up a little bit, coming back, using their service as a currency to get to college or trade. Anybody electrician here? I need an electrician. I mean, you can't find a plumber, you can't find an electrician. I think one of the things that are completely undervalued in today's society are the trades. And there's a lot of incredible experience that you can get in the military that would be useful in these endeavors. So I think that there are things that smart people could do to sit down and try to understand what's happening. Plenty of college grads with no jobs. My son became one. And so I think that they haven't optimally strategized, but it wouldn't surprise me if they brought back the draft. Now like many of you, I am just old enough to have a draft number. And my draft number when I was graduating from high school was 13. And I was a pilot. So I had a very fundamental choice to make whether or not to enlist in the Army, because the Army would take non-commissioned officers as pilots, particularly for something called the Oman, which I already knew how to fly. And versus taking my chances in college, it turned out to be the first year they didn't draft anybody. But, I, like many of you, know what it feels like to have a draft number and think about whether I'm going to get drafted. Well, there are probably things we can do before it gets that bad. Because the enlistment, I've heard that, we were talking about that today, the enlistments are hard now, without a doubt.
When I went in, there was no number. You were just drafted.
Well, they got rid of student deferments, the S2.
Yeah.
The number was the lottery.
Right.
The number was, that's when they came up with the lottery.
Right.
So before the lottery, you just got drafted.
Right. And then there was the lottery where you got a number.
Yeah.
It was pretty entertaining, when you think about, organizations like, you think about surgery, it is really like teams. There's a hierarchy, there's a chief resident and a senior resident and a mid-level and a couple of junior residents. It's amazing how the lessons that you learn in the military about how to treat people are applicable to so many aspects of life. And there are so many leaders who abuse their power, and yet you find other leaders who aren't flashy, who are quiet, dedicated, eat last, serve their people, not looking for fanfare. There's a great book called Good Great, a very famous business book. And the best leaders are quiet, not flashy, dedicated, and determined to serve. In this case, the company, but you could change it to their need. And during COVID and during, so many, during Blizzard, the hospitals are pretty much like a military. It's everybody pulling together, long hours, poor food, bad places to sleep, those kinds of things. Other questions?
So, I'm trying to use my words carefully, but in terms of resources and people who you think are more depraved of resources, whether it's physical, cultural, economic, geography. You've been to Honduras, probably the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. How would you rate that or compare that to some of the Middle Eastern places you've been?
Well, when I was in Honduras, the average lifespan was 48. And we were in the Oro Valley. And look at the people that literally had no access to care. And depending on, the rules of engagement, we were there to provide civilian care wherever possible. So I did a lot of surgery in a tent in the Oro Valley. It's very weird having a fly in your operating room. And it's hard to wrap your head around it. Or what do you do if you have a tetanus-prone wound and all of your soldiers have tetanus vaccine, but you didn't bring any tetanus, immune globulin because you didn't think about the people you're treating. So we saw a lot of that bad disease, bad breast cancer, big thyroids. On the other hand, in the Middle East, there were a lot of war wounds, particularly from the Iran-Iraq wars. Arms bent out of shape, eyeballs, just bulging from leishmaniasis. And the access to care is similarly bad. I'll just tell stories. Sorry about telling stories. So we get to the prisoner of war camp, and there's 12 of us, 2 surgeons, and we changed we were going to go to the airport in Kuwait City, but there weren't very many casualties, so we got diverted to a POW camp. And we changed the manning table. And so the surgeons, we're surgeons. We're kind of like the pilots. Everything you heard is not true, but some of it is true. And we say, we'll be the consultants. You guys can go take care of the patients and call us if you need us. It sounded pretty good. So they came back and they said, okay, we're ready for you. We have 300 consults for you. And there were hundreds of people, all with abdominal pain, laying there. And it's like, oh. And how do you figure out who needs an operation, who needs transportation, in a world where you're used to having a CAT scan, blood draw, X-ray? It was real doctoring. And I could talk about the impact of technology on today's doctors, but that's for a different day. So we were out there in the field examining like 300 people. And out of those hundreds, most of them had what was known as refeeding syndrome. They'd been bombed and starved, and we had a great idea, let's give them food. Lots of food. So everybody knows what an MRE really stands for?
Meals ready.
Well, that's what its official term is. But
Meals ready to happen.
the term at the time, with no disrespect to anybody, was meals rejected by Ethiopians. And no disrespect to Ethiopians, that's just the term at the time. And high calorie. An MRE has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of calories. If you've been starving And the French use all the cheese. Everybody's donating food to feed to the prisoners of war. Bad idea. Arnold Schwarzenegger said it best in the movie Predator. Odd idea. We gave all this high-calorie food, all these carbohydrates to all these people who've been starving, and we gave them what is known as refeeding syndrome. I'd imagined a big pot of chicken noodle soup. No, we give them MREs and cheese and all this other stuff. So we had all this abdominal pain, and we worked our way through it. But there was one kid who all his pain was right here in the right lower quadrant. Bend over. I go, this one's different. I had no labs, no CAT scan, no X-ray, no nothing. I go, this one has appendicitis. So we said, okay, we're a clearing company. We don't have an operating room in the prison war camp. We're going to go up onto the main pipeline road and look for a place to do surgery. Go to the first hospital. Full-time, active duty, their orders of engagement, no civilian care. He's got appendicitis, he's just a kid. Sorry. Try the reserve hospital down the way. Down, the two of us, drive in, we got a Iraqi prisoner, we think he has appendicitis, and the guy looked at me and says, well, if you think he needs surgery so bad, go do it yourself. He didn't know I was a surgeon. So I said, okay. And took out his appendix and said, I think you can take it from here, fellas. So, you run into all these things that we don't appreciate how good the care is in America, how good the care is here in Buffalo. I look at surgery care from the point of view of trying to serve 1.5 million people in the 8 counties there. And I know that as we move further and further from the city, we have our challenges, whether it's, 30 miles from here, 60 miles from here. Just staffing all these hospitals is a challenge. We're in the rural part of the state. It's not even the same order of magnitude as what you see in Honduras or the Middle East or in other places. One of our residents runs the Global Medical Surgical Support Group, GSMSG. If you want to do something that does some good. GSMSG's name is Aaron Epstein. And he'd taken 10 teams to Kurdistan when he was a medical student. I said, you make a great resident. Took him into our program, took more teams, and 9 days after the shooting of the Ukraine, Aaron had a team in country in the Ukraine. And he was recently awarded the Citizens Honors Award, really super proud, but we're so proud of Aaron. The second highest civilian award in this country given by the Congressional Medal of Honor Society. So if you want to do something that does good, GSMSG, Global Medical Surgical Support Group, led by Aaron Epstein, nonprofit. They've been in Ghana, they've been in Kurdistan, they've been in Ukraine, they've been in 10 cities during COVID. So there are plenty of people that are still doing amazingly good work because they recognize what we think is, we're not even in the same ballpark of care. When you look at the horrendous diseases that people can't get treated. To put a finer point on it, the WHO a few years ago stated that access to basic surgery, this is a long answer to a short question, access to basic surgery was declared a human right. 11% of the world's diseases can be treated with surgery. That's a lot. 307 billion. And so there's a lot that we can all do. And we have no concept of how to think about it here in America. So if you think about sub-Saharan Africa, there is one surgeon for every 4 million people. So the way you attack that problem is by training surgeons. So there are groups, the American College of Surgeons, the SAGES, some of these other groups partnering with the African Surgery Society, known as COSEXA, with groups like Aaron, either former military, current military on leave, helping to train people all over the world. The military has a massive peacetime goal. You have no idea how much our Department of Defense spends doing breast cancer research. Supporting women's health in Ghana, this whole Southern Command. We sent a team down there. So there's a lot we all think about it as combat, but there's a lot that we do and that our military is logistically capable to do, because one of the most effective logistics organizations in the world that we can do to support human rights. All of them. I hope that answers your question. Any other questions? Yes.
Try to put yourself you're in Gaza and you're in the hospital. And all I know is what I see on TV. I have no inside information. But all these thousands of people getting blown up, and the Israelis, IDF is saying that, well, there's Hamas in the hospital. And you're a doctor, you're a medical person. Do you just think, how do you have the ability, if there's one there, you have the ability to rat them out, to get them out of my hospital so you stop attacking us, or you conceal that guy and, make him pretend that he's a medical person. I mean, you're a doctor. How do you weigh politics versus doing the best thing for
Well, if they're injured, you take care of them. That's a-
Pardon me?
If they're injured, you take care of them. I mean, there are so many circumstances in war where you shoot them and they don't die and you take care of them. I mean,
Well, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, you got a Hamas guy, people down in the basement of your hospital, and you're the doctor, and you know they're there. If they really are, they're there. Let's assume that you could tell the IDF they're there, get them out of my hospital. Or do you just ignore it and go about your work and get by?
it is a very tough question.
Yeah?
And it's tough because throughout history, people have used hospitals in similar ways. As I said, our hospital is on 10 million gallons of jet fuel. Are you a military target or are you a hospital? So this is nothing new. I mean, this is not new. I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying it isn't new where people, our own military, by hospital in general, shouldn't do that. That's why we didn't sign the Geneva Convention. I think if you're thinking about it in a hospital and you know that your hospital is going to be blown up if it's discovered, you've got tough choices to make. And I'm going to dodge your question a little bit because none of us know what our choices would be unless we were really there. It's easy for any of us to sit here and go, well, I would rat them out. Well, I would rat them out. Well, play the game when the stakes are real. But I can tell you that this has been going on for the last 10,000 years, where people have been hiding under medical care or putting tents up. That's why in certain types of military doctrine, you bomb all the things with the Red Cross on it first. So one of the solutions was to start taking Red Crosses off of your tents. The Germans were famous for it, the Russians were famous for it. I mean, it's a terribly complicated process. You'd like to say, Hamas bad, turn them in, clean them out, but it is more complicated. But I'm kind of
And correct me if I'm wrong, Hamas was not declared a terrorist organization until fairly recently.
Yeah.
Before that, it was a political wing of their representation, good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just saying, it's a little, like you said, it's more complicated than just search.
Everything is complicated. The Irish conflicts and all of these things. And now look at our own country's politics. It could very easily become radicalized and become violent. We're living in incredible peace. Don't kid yourself that it could become radicalized in just a different version of the same human story that's been true for the last 1,000 years. Let us pray, no matter what your religion is, that it doesn't come to that. Because when you think about what we're going through in a world when you can't have a sports championship without killing, whether it's baseball, basketball, or football, these are tense times. And we need cool, smart, thoughtful people to weigh in to try to bring us together. And thank goodness some of the coolest minds around are in military leadership. They're very smart people at the very top of the food chain who've been trained for years to think about these problems. Second?
We should put them on the border.
We should do something to do that. But I can tell you that at the end of Desert Storm, then the discussion was, let's go to Baghdad. And we're all sitting there wondering whether our tours are going to be extended to head into Iraq. It was really smart people, George Bush, the president at the time, Colin Powell, who said, we can take it, but then what do we do with it? Did we learn nothing from our time in Vietnam? Nothing from all the previous wars? Colin Powell and George Bush were two of the smartest people in the universe that day. And they said, let's bring everybody home. It became what we came to do, which was to take the Iraqis out of Kuwait. So
Could you repeat? I couldn't hear what you were saying.
they were the smartest people in the world because they said, after we kick the Iraqis out of Kuwait, let's send everybody home. Because
Oh,
we could
back
take
then, yeah.
we could take Baghdad, but what would we do with it? Now that we've taken it, what are we doing? So I put a lot of faith in really smart people like Colin Powell and George Bush at my time when I'm in the Middle East getting a first-hand view. It was an act of genius because not everybody was. This is just like World War II. Patton wanted to go to Moscow. I mean, these are very complicated decisions that often are written in the blood of other people's children. So the more you've been to a war zone, the more you think that a war is a bad idea and that we have no choice but to deal with it. I was up in Kuwait and went to a mass burial ground and saw what it looks like to see 10,000 people living in it, not living, but being dead in the mass grave. It really kind of changes your attitude towards being too quick on the trigger. And yet we still have to respond. There are bad people killing people. And for better or worse, we're more or less the ones for these people. Question?
Not sure if you saw this or if you know anything about this, but was there any pushback between dealing with American wounded first over Iraqi citizens? Did you encounter any of that? Did you know of any of
I had
that?
a kid with appendicitis and I wouldn't let me treat him.
Yeah,
We didn't have a lot of wounded.
right.
And, the hospitals, it was an interesting mix, very different than Vietnam, which built up slowly. A lot of people all drafted. Because Desert Storm was like quick, so many people were mobilized, active duty units, reserve units, they're all popping off. There were no general officers who were doctors in the entire theater of operations. There were no generals. So there were over 14,000 medical personnel in theater with no generals. Our POW camp had 1,000 people and had a general. So when you think about the sort of the thinking around the leadership, it came up really quickly. The active duty hospitals tended not want to treat civilians, and the reserve hospitals made up of civilians who, in uniform, tended to be more thoughtful about providing care to people. Not that it was 100% in one way or the other. The other thing is that the military had been filling many of these medical slots with anybody they could fill it with. So I was a general surgeon, 61J. Everybody, you can never forget your designation. It's like your social security number, 61J. And I would meet other 61Js who hadn't done any surgery in 5 years. Like, why are you in the same manning table slot that I'm in? You find a lot of weird things because it all activated so quickly. When we traveled above a certain parallel, we went armed. And there were people that would walk up to doctors, sadly, and said, they didn't give me any bullets. Do you have any bullets for me? That kind of thing. These are sort of the things, whereas, Vietnam came up much more slowly, much more orderly, kind of expanded over time. There are unintended consequences to putting that many people in the theater of operations in such a short period. Little weird things like that. Like, no, I didn't give any bullets, so I had to account for them. Any other questions? Yes.
I have one. So you grew up in Boston, is that right? Like you said, you're from Boston, or are you from here originally?
I was born in Boston, grew up in Maryland, went back to Boston for 30 years and came here.
So I'm just curious, like your connection to Buffalo, did that have to do with Niagara Falls and the 365th? Was it just kind of coincidence that you came to Buffalo?
Pure coincidence. Pure, I sat and watched the Giants beat the Bills in a tent in the middle of the night on Saturday, not knowing that someday I would have my heart broken like the rest of you do, a couple of years in a row. I got here as a Patriots fan, my own residents would put Bills flags on my door and all that. But I know how much it means. I know how great it would be for our city to win a sports championship. And I've been the last couple of years of going, let's go Buffalo. I mean, absolutely, because it would be fabulous. Not knowing that that night in the tent would foreshadow future disappointments.
But we have a cross championship, so there you go.
There you go. We have some MAC-10 champions.
So great humanizer, using medicine as a way to humanize the conflict, but also to be a force multiplier on the battlefield. For example, we have a 101-year-old who was here several times who was shot down on a B-17 mission, and he was really badly beat up and had needed surgery, had an eye problem and everything else. And he said that the German doctor, they took care of him. And the other way around, in more modern conflict, the Russians have been very, from what I understand, very good to the Ukrainian prisoners as a way to weaken resistance, saying, hey,
Sure.
if you surrender and you give up, the Russians will not treat us bad. And by all accounts, I've heard that they've done some pretty good unit surrenders because they couldn't get their medical people out to get treated by their own Ukrainian doctors, and they figured by surrendering, they had a better chance of keeping their soldiers alive by going to the Russians.
And that was true in Desert Storm. They surrendered in droves. And we provided medical care to everybody, that we could. I mean, surgery is a kind of a special thing. But most of our soldiers who were injured went from, local care to a mobile aeromedical staging facility and then out to Landstuhl in Germany pretty quickly, usually within 6 to 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the surgical care was, strategically transported out, getting people ready for transport was one of our mission.
That is right. Question. Do doctors all over the world take the Hippocratic Oath, or is that just an American and a European thing?
It's an American and European thing, but I wouldn't be surprised. I actually don't know the precise answer to your question. It's pretty common that I travel all over the world. I've operated in most countries in the world. And pretty similar ethos all around the world. They're not fundamentally built differently in the different countries that I've been to. Operate in Latin America, South America, Europe. I think that's something that holds people together. You don't go into this profession without the goal of trying to help people. And an injured person is an injured person.
The 30% of the medical that you said stay active duty, does that include nurses too, or is that just the doctors, just the nurses too?
Yeah, the reserves are by far your largest medical community, without a doubt. And that's one of the ways you can swap people out. It's not just always going overseas. Sometimes you're backfilling the unit that went overseas by staying in the U.S., which is an incredibly valuable role in and of itself. And one of the things that the military has going for it, because med school is so expensive these days, is that they offer scholarships in return for time served. That sort of sounds like a prison sentence. No, they offer scholarships in return for service as a physician in the military. I'm very proud of those people that do that. Anything else I can use?
So you come out of medical school, you decide you want to become a surgeon, and has it ever happened when you you got to go to combat zone, and all of a sudden things are so bad, and they say, here's a scalpel. Well, I'm not a surgeon. You are now.
That happens.
Can a doctor? Yeah.
I became a gynecologist for a day. I got there was a young woman who was bleeding from her ovary, and she was trying to die. And, there's a couple of things that you learn. First of all, every soldier wears a dog tag with a blood group on it. And we had no blood. We were like our first day. So we lined up soldiers with the same blood group and transfused her whole blood. I had never done a tubectomy and tubal ligation and resection. So yeah, you have to sometimes do that. And in even worse situations, gynecologists, they may start off being gynecologists, but it doesn't take a whole lot of time in a war zone to start learning how to put intestines together. You have to adapt and overcome.
Did you ever get a chance to to do a surgery robotically, like a laparoscopic procedure in the rear to a patient forward?
So I was there and I was writing letter after letter after letter to get a laparoscope into the theater of operations, getting nowhere. But I was looking at it strictly from a business point of view. Do you know how much it costs to train a combat soldier in a complex task? And you have to take out their appendix by cutting them open and sending them back to the United States. Whereas you could have taken out their appendix and a week later they could still stay in theater. I was trying to be very practical about it. Is it practical to treat war wounds? But remember, when you have 50,000 people, it's like having a small city. They get appendicitis and cholecystitis and they get hernias. The most important case I did was not for life and death stuff. The most important case I did was an inguinal hernia on the head shaft on the base. It improved the quality of my life.
You're a gastro guy.
I learned how the military really works. First of all, the Army's run by the NCOs. The officers are just kidding themselves. Number one. Number two, he looked at me and he says, "You're going to send me back home?" And I said, "Well," and he said, "Please don't send me home. I have no job waiting. I'd like to stay." I said, "Well, do you do any heavy lifting?" He goes, "Not a bit. I'm in charge." So I said, "Okay, you can stay." And my birthday happened about a month later. He must have opened up like 50 MREs getting enough cocoa to make a cake. I mean, you know, you learn a lot about people. For many people, they wanted to stay because they'd been unemployed or being in the military was a better job than the jobs that they had to go back to. And they stayed, so many people stayed as long as they could. I thought it was a pretty interesting slice of life. I was interested in staying because they said if you go to flight school, you get helicopter training. And they ended the program like 3 days before I had to make a decision. And I went back to Los Angeles.
There's space for you.
We would have done the helicopter training. Is there anything else I can do for people? So first of all, thank you. Second of all, I'm easily findable. I'm on the website, the University of Buffalo Department of Surgery. Lastly, for those of anybody that might be interested, our department holds a social justice and health equity lectureship every year about improving care in our community. Nothing to do with the military, it has everything to do with being better neighbors. We have a city of good neighbors and trying to fix some of the inequitable things that we find in our world from a health and quality of life point of view. At the medical school, 5:30 on Thursday, or you can catch it on Zoom. And we would love to see anybody who wants to come. There's food before, and for those of you who like, you know, buying local, buying in our community, the after will be served by Golden Cup Coffee, which is literally next door to the Tufts where the shitty was, and they make the best pastries in the world. So if you like pastry, come listen to the lecture, come have some Golden Cup Coffee. And thank you so much.
Thanks everybody for coming. This was a great night. I mean, it's amazing. You can read all you want until you hear the stories. You hear from people that were there. It's totally different, and I don't know what I expected to hear, but I loved what I heard, and just the stories of the good things that people are doing to help each other, whether you're friends or enemies or allies. That's always great to hear. So thank you so much, Doctor. There's an honor that goes to you. So
My pleasure.
thank you.
Be well, stay warm, everybody. Go Bills next.
Doc, if you ever would like to do a presentation from Steve, if you want your warrant, I'd love to work with the VA an opportunity to appreciate it.
Visit too, so you know, this was
Oh, yeah. Oh, good. Wow. Surgery and heart surgery.